Space, the expanse in which the solar system, stars, and galaxies exist, the universe. It all started with those who had a vision of what lied beyond the horizon. Across the planet, individuals rose up who wanted to explore the answers behind the constellations. Together, through time, they set the foundation for modern astronomy. However, the astronomers of our history would have never dreamed that the world would one day join their curiosity, and root and even compete for the complete exploration of the universe that we inhabit. This drive that became ingrained into modern society has brought us to the beginning of spatial achievements. We've managed to launch rockets into space, put man on the moon, sent rovers to Mars, and send telescopes farther into outer space than ever imagined. And this is just the beginning. These amazing achievements would have never occurred without the space race, a competition regarding the progress made in the field of space exploration. This exchange between the United States and the USSR all began with the launch of a Russian satellite known as Sputnik. Many years before its creation, in post-World War II USSR, a group of scientists pioneered the work which would ultimately lead to the first artificial satellite, one created solely to send signals back to Earth. Many years before its creation, in post-World War II USSR, a group of scientists pioneered the work which would ultimately lead to the first Soviet artificial satellite. In 1946, the U.S. Air Force commissioned a team to research artificial satellites and multi-stage rockets, a rocket that has multiple parts that work individually. This resulted in the project of World-Circling Spaceship, which, if implemented, could hypothetically produce the first American satellite as early as 1951. Meanwhile, in the USSR, the rocket development program quickly unfolded under Stalin, and the idea of a satellite was quickly forming along with it. As the idea started becoming a reality, Soviet authorities forcefully sent German rocket specialists into the USSR. When the chief of the group asked Minister Dmitry Ustinov when they could return home, he responded with, "As soon as you make rocket fly around the world." This reflected the determination of the Soviets. In December 1946, Mikhail Tikhonov transferred to N24 to serve as deputy chief in the new organization of specialists who would address the problems of multi-stage rockets and orbital flight. In February 1948, Tikhonov presented his concept of a multi-stage rocket. The reaction to his initial report was primarily skeptical. Still undeterred, he continued to make appearances at various scientific conferences to argue for his concept. He believed that by packaging multiple rockets into a single vehicle, it would be possible to launch a satellite using existing technology. Through repeated attempts, he faced many rejections, but continued until he gained support. Tikhonov's far-fetched ideas produced mixed reactions. During a discussion session, General Tuchilin of the Artillery Engineering Service commented that the creation of a satellite is a useless idea, not even worthy of discussion, let alone its actual development, and argued that the Institute was wasting time on insignificant topics. The department was then disbanded. Fortunately, assignments from the military ensued the survival of the N24 team, but any work on the idea of satellites went underground for several years. In March 1953, Joseph Stalin, who ruled the Soviet Union, died. Khrushchev, who ruled after Stalin, set out to reform many aspects of Stalinism and continued and accelerated the rocket development program, as it was the only hope for the USSR to overcome the US air supremacy and gain the Soviets the ability to strike the US at will. Khrushchev's support of the rocket program is what ultimately led to the completion of Sputnik. After Stalin's death, Tikhonov's satellite project was solid enough to introduce into Soviet politics. He lobbied for his project to convince the Soviet government that America could potentially launch a satellite before the USSR completed their own. His work was approved, and he was promised political support, and the chief of N24 was even prohibited from putting any obstacles in his way. Finally, on May 25, 1954, the satellite project was formally evaluated and received full approval. As the testing of the rocket progressed in secrecy, the the Soviet authorities gave the world few hints about its potential. In June 1957, a popular newspaper ran an article by President of the Academy of Sciences, promising the satellite launch within the next few months. Finally, on August 26, 1957, the official Soviet agency announced that a multi-stage missile flew a successful test mission. Most of this information notably received little attention in the West outside of the intelligence community. Pressed on time, the Soviets conducted the development and the manufacturing of the satellite's parts simultaneously. The main issues with production were due to manufacturing the hemispheres of the satellite, their welding and polishing of the external surfaces. A scratch would ruin the results. Korolev yelled at workers for not doing a thorough job and reminded them that this satellite will be in museums. After countless tests to ensure the safety and competence of the launch, on September 7, 1957, the rocket flew a second flawless mission, clearing the way for the satellite launch. In the weeks before the intended launch date, Korolev traveled to various meetings, overseeing the satellite launch and making certain that everything went smoothly. Originally, the launch was scheduled for October 7, 1957. However, it was later advanced to October 4th due to rumors that America was preparing for its own orbital launch. On October 1st, 1957, Radio Moscow announced that the frequencies on which people around the world could hear the signals from the satellite. October 4th, 1957. The fueling of the rocket started at 5:45 Moscow time. Tension was unbearable. Breath was held across the lands as the wait for the first artificial satellite to be launched into space loomed overhead. The launch vehicle with the satellite blasted off on October 4th, 1957, 17 hours later. Soon after the powered flight of the rocket was over, operators down on Earth received the signal that the engine cut off, and they could happily confirm that the engine shutdown took place within the time period required to allow the satellite into orbit. After a short pause, Sputnik spoke.
Anytime you do something first, you get a prize. In this case, it was the prize of being able to do it first. Russians also had the first astronaut and human astronaut in space too, right? Yuri Gagarin. So being first is something that nobody can ever take away from you. That's why scientists always like to discover things, or people like to be the first to invent things. But it doesn't mean that you stay the winner in the long term as technology marches on.
The space race has begun. The signal lasted for about 2 minutes until the satellite went out of range. Exhausted test personnel crowded together to celebrate their success. After years of gruesome work and dedication to the creation of Sputnik, the team from N24 could proudly say they were responsible for the creation of the world's first satellite. Before the satellite completed its first orbit, the official Soviet news agency announced the launch to the world. It was now the turn of American scientists to give the news of the Soviet success. They used this as an opportunity to launder money for their own space projects. A large part of America's effort and success in space exploration that followed the launch of Sputnik and ultimately led to the Apollo moon landing, the end of the space race, was sparked to life by the momentous event on October 4th, 1957. The creation of Sputnik may seem minuscule when looking at everything we have accomplished since. But in reality, many, if not all, modern astronomical successes would not have occurred without the historic launch of Sputnik. Sputnik's technology may not be directly responsible for the progress we've made in space exploration thus far, but rather the attitude that Sputnik's launch brought behind space exploration, observation, and expansion. Sputnik gave us a society in which we want to know what sort of world, what sort of galaxy, and what sort of universe we live in. We salute you, Sputnik.
We are a curiosity-driven people, the human race. We always want to know what's out there. We always want to go where we haven't gone before. And we also want to understand where we've come from.